On her wedding day, Claire was about to live the happiest moment of her life, but a secret hidden by those she most loved threatened to destroy everything. With the help of a parrot, which impresses voices, the truth about a forbidden betrayal comes to light at the most unexpected moment. It was a sunny Saturday, typical of autumn in the small town of Redwood Springs in the United States. The sound of dried leaves shaking in the wind and the aroma of fresh flowers permeated the air, while the preparations for Claire and David's wedding were in full progress. The church, decorated with white flowers and lilacs, reflected the happiness of the moment. It was the realization of a dream for Claire, who had planned that day since childhood. She was a charming young woman, with a captivating smile and a sweet personality. Her blonde hair fell into soft waves, and her wedding dress was a stunning lace and silk model, which seemed to have been tailored to her. David, the groom, was a serious man, with a flawless look and a kind smile, always supporting Claire patiently. They met in college and after years of dating had finally decided that this would be the day to celebrate their union. Everything was perfect, or at least it seemed to be, but something was wrong, something no one could imagine. In the garden of Claire's house, a green and yellow parrot called Oliver swayed in his cage, observing the preparations. Oliver was not any parrot. He had a peculiar skill, imitating the voices of those around him with a frightening perfection. Claire loved the parrot, who always accompanied her on sunny mornings, joyfully singing her favorite melodies. While the guests arrived and the last touches were given to floral arrangements, a shadow hovered over Claire. She didn't know, but David was hiding a secret that would change everything that day. He was about to marry Claire, but at the bottom of his heart, he was in love with someone else. And without Claire knowing, he had had an affair with someone very close to her. David's secret was well kept, but the parrot, who always listened to everything, had an unbeatable memory. And that day, something was about to be revealed. Claire was radiant as she prepared for the great moment. She was looking in the mirror of her parents' room, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The white flowers that adorned the environment, the softness of the dress, and the soft music in the background created the feeling of a fairy tale. But deep down, something caused him a small tightness in his chest, a vague feeling that something was about to change. She took a deep breath and focused on what was about to happen. Your life would change forever with that yes. David's image, his fiancée, appeared in his mind. They had built a solid relationship based on respect, trust, and much love. David was the man she always dreamed of spending the rest of her life. Meanwhile, in the garden, Parrot Oliver continued to repeat his words, as if he was attending the event. For those who did not know, Oliver was not just a pet. He was the silent observer of the house. There was something curious in the way the parrot communicated. He seemed to hear everything, memorized everything, and sometimes repeated conversations and phrases that not even Claire or anyone else knew he had heard. Often Claire thought that the parrot knew more about the lives of others than themselves. But she never imagined that her curiosity and memory could have something to do with the secret that was about to be revealed. David, in turn, was not in the same enthusiasm. Although he was smiling at the guests and greeting his friends and family, his eyes cheated on some discomfort. He constantly looked at the home door, as if waiting for something, or rather someone. His heart was heavy, and he felt a knot in his throat. The weight of what was about to be discovered was almost unbearable. David had begun a romance with someone close to Claire, someone you trust months earlier. At first he tried to ignore, but the attraction was too strong to ignore, and as the marriage approached he was increasingly lost, stuck between love for Claire and passion for someone else. He tried in any way to erase what happened, pretend that nothing has changed. But what he did not know was that fate has a peculiar way to manifest himself, and today his secret would no longer be kept. The tension was palpable. At the happiest moment of Claire's life, the past was about to be thrown in his face. And no one, not even the parrot Oliver, knew the extent of the pain that was about to happen. The sound of the music that was beginning to echo through the church, announcing that the marriage was about to begin, brought a brief relief to the anxious hearts. Claire was ready. She descended the stairs hand in hand with her father, the radiant smile on her face, her eyes shining with emotion. The red carpet that guided her to the altar seemed longer than she could imagine, but her feet flooded, almost as if she was in a dream. David was there, standing, waiting for her. He looked at her with that soft smile, as if she loved her more than anything in this world. But unlike Claire, he was not so safe from his heart. With every step she took, he felt the weight of the lie he carried. And in his chest, something choked him. He was trying to hide, stay calm, but the truth was there, ready to show himself. Worse, he knew she would be devastated. As Claire walked down the hallway, Oliver, the parrot, was in her cage in the corner, watching everything as always. However, his presence at that moment would be more important than anyone could predict. The parrot, with his ability to imitate voices, was about to do something he should never have done. What no one knew was that morning, while everyone prepared, Claire had left the parrot with her friend and godmother, so she could be a fun presence at the event. Linda, a cheerful and outgoing woman, loved jokes, and when she was with the parrot, she always made a point of talking to him irreverently just to hear what he repeated. But at that moment, Linda had been distracted and left the parrot alone for a few minutes. And it was at this moment that Oliver, in a rare moment of exact memory, began to repeat what he had heard of a conversation made hours before between David and Linda. It was at least an uncomfortable conversation. I can't continue like this, beautiful. I'm marrying Claire, but it's you who I really love. David's voice, nervous and confused, echoed in the perfectly imitated parrot's cage. Claire's heart shot. She stopped in the middle of the frozen hallway, feeling a shiver through her spine. The sound of the parrot's voice seemed to have invaded the air, stronger than any melody touched by the musicians. Her eyes widened, and she looked at the parrot, with a feeling that something was wrong, but she didn't know exactly what. Linda, who was with Claire, realized what happened and ran to the parrot, trying to prevent him from continuing. But it was too late. Claire had already heard enough. She looked at David still standing on the altar, and a deep silence took over the church. Claire's look was not of happiness or relief. She didn't smile anymore, nor did she feel the butterflies in her stomach. What she felt was a poignant pain, a sense of betrayal and loss. It was not possible. It couldn't be true. But what else could it be? David, realizing that the parrot had revealed what he tried to hide, felt his heart freeze. He knew he had lost control of the situation. He had failed, but he didn't know how much it hurt until he saw Claire's eyes so full of confidence and now full of doubt and sadness. She didn't need to ask, because he already knew that what the parrot repeated was the purest truth. Claire, with the pain crossing her chest, turned slowly to Linda, her fixed eyes on her, seeking explanations. Beautiful, nervous, tried to speak, but the truth was in the air, too heavy to be denied. David stepped ahead, trying to get closer to Claire, but she pushed him away with a quick gesture from her hand. No, don't say anything, David. Not now, she whispered, her trembling but firm voice. The tension in the air was unbearable. All the guests were silent, watching the scene that unfolded like a nightmare of a fairy tale broken. Claire's pain was stamped on her every gesture. She didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I wanted to hear anymore, if I wanted to hear something from David that could relieve anguish in his heart. But the truth was clear. He had betrayed her. What's more, he was about to marry her, even though he knew his heart was not completely with her. Silence in the church was deep, almost palpable, as everyone was waiting for what would come next. Claire, still paralyzed by the parrot's revelation, turned slowly to the altar. David was there, immovable, his expression of regret more evident than any word he could say. It was a moment that no one could forget, not only for the unexpected scene, but for the emotional intensity that spilled like an avalanche. However, something was emerging under the surface, something no one had predicted. Claire's eyes began to widen, and a feeling of anger grew inside her, but not by David's betrayal. No, what really bothered her was the fact that she had ignored so many things, so many signs that were there right in front of her, but she couldn't see. Marriage, the happiness she believed to be about to live, everything seemed to have been built on lies and omissions, and that hit her more strongly than her own betrayal. But when looking at the faces of the guests, some shocked, some clearly embarrassed, and many with pity, Claire felt a bitter feeling mingling with her pain. The shame of being deceived, of putting his confidence in something so fragile. How could she have been so blind? How could you trust someone who was willing to risk everything, even a marriage, for a passing passion? David, in turn, felt the weight of it as a ton over his shoulders. He knew he couldn't apologize or justify his attitude. He couldn't turn time to correct his mistake, But what he didn't expect was that Claire's reaction was so silent. She wasn't screaming. She was not angry. It was just silent. And that made his fault even more painful. He couldn't deny that she had the right to react as he wanted. But deep down, he wanted her to be strong. I wanted her to say something, to explode with anger, but Claire seemed to be in another level of suffering, deeper, quieter. Linda, who has always been by Claire's side, has now been in an impossible situation. She knew the story of David and what had happened, but never imagined that the truth would be revealed that way. She looked at Claire, trying to understand how she should act. Her eyes were teary, the guilt also consumed her. The accomplice role was being revealed to her, and nothing, not even her friendship with Claire, seemed more important than the weight of being responsible for hiding the truth. Claire then turned to Beautiful with empty eyes. "I never asked you to protect me from something like this. I trusted you," she said, her low and almost unrecognizable voice. There was no anger in his words, but a deep wear, a sadness that dragged on all that she believed to be true. Beautiful, not knowing what to answer, just shook his head. She knew there was nothing she could say to repair the pain that Claire felt at that moment. But the weight of the lie she helped keep was there, exposed for everyone to see. But there was something more in history that neither Claire nor David knew. Claire's reaction would not be the last surprise of that day. The real turnaround was yet to come, and she was about to change everything in a way that no one could predict. While everyone was still digesting what had just happened, the environment in the church was loaded with tension. Claire was standing back to everyone, her eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't know what to do or what to think. The parrot continued to repeat his sentence, almost like a ghostly echo that would not let her escape. I can't continue like this, Beautiful. I'm marrying Claire, but it's you who I really love." That's when Claire heard the sound of something breaking. She turned abruptly. Linda, on a boost, had knocked down a wax candle that burned on the altar. The flame hesitated for a second before erasing himself, as if until the fire was trying to extinguish the tension of the moment. David stepped ahead, but again Claire prevented him with a look that, despite the pain, transmitted an unexpected force. "No, David, you won't say anything. Not now." The guests were in a state of shock, still processing what had happened. Some sat down, others whispered softly, and others still tried to keep the composure. But no one could imagine what was about to happen. It was then that an unexpected sound came from the main door of the church. Everyone turned to see who was entering. Claire didn't believe what her eyes were seeing. Outside, a man was standing at the entrance with an expression that overflowed with nervousness, but also of determination. He looked straight at Claire, his eyes full of feelings that Claire could not identify, but knew she was loaded with something deep. It was John. John was an old friend of Claire. They had known themselves in childhood, and although they had distanced themselves over the years, they have always kept in touch, but never very often. He was in a different city, far from Redwood Springs, but something inside him made the decision to come there at that moment, that day, just when everything was crumbling. Claire, still astonished, looked at him, his eyes faltering between surprise and confusion. What was he doing there? How did he know what was going on? He knew nothing about marriage or betrayal, but deep down Claire felt that he had something to say. John walked slowly to the altar, and all eyes followed his steps, disconcerted. He didn't seem to care about the eyes of curiosity and astonishment. He approached Claire, who watched him in silence. "Claire," he said in a firm voice, "I know you're in a difficult time, but there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you before, but fear stopped me." Claire's heart began to beat faster. She didn't know what to expect, but something in her intimate told her that John's revelation could change everything once again. He looked at David, who was still standing behind her, and with surprising calm said, "David is not the man you think is, Claire. I saw you and David grow together. I saw your relationship develop, but there is a truth that needs to be said. Something he never had the courage to confess to you." Claire felt her breathing miss. What was he saying? Your mind could not process completely. "David didn't betray you with Beautiful," John continued. "He had an affair with my sister. And not only that, Claire, he was the reason she disappears, her sudden departure. She was pregnant, and he left her when I needed him. You never knew that, but I was there. I saw everything." John's words hit Claire as a cold wave. She looked at David, whose eyes were now full of despair. and for a moment the world around her seemed to disappear. The shock of David's betrayal had been devastating, but what John had just revealed was much worse. Silence in the church was absolute. Everyone was frozen, as if time had stopped. The sound of a leaf that fell to the floor would be higher than the tension that filled the air. Claire, still stunned, couldn't process John's words. His mind spinned, trying to gather the pieces of the puzzle that now seemed to have been assembled in a wrong and cruel way. David was pale, his eyes glazed, and his body, once erect and confident, now seemed small in the face of the truth. He never imagined that the secret would go out like this, so abruptly and without mercy. He wanted to speak, wanted to justify his actions, but he wanted no words that could save that. Everything he had built with Claire, all the moments of love and confidence they had shared, were crumbling like a castle of letters, and there was no way to go back. Claire felt as if the floor was collapsing under her feet. She looked at John, and then to David, trying to understand the magnitude of what he had just heard. David's betrayal was something she already feared, but what he had done to John's sister, what he had done with a woman's life, the radical change in a person's life, that surpassed any pain she could have imagined. She felt a weight in her chest as if her heart was being crushed. The confidence she had in him was such a solid construction that she now crumbled into pieces before her eyes. What he did, and what he failed to do, was much more than she could bear. Claire didn't know what she could say or do. "Claire, please listen to me." David tried to step forward, but she interrupted him with a quick hand gesture, as if the pain he represented away. "No, David, there is nothing more to be said. I loved you, but you lied in such a cruel way. How can I believe something you say now? How can I trust you after that?" Her voice was trembling, but there was a firmness in each word, a force she didn't know she had. The pain was there, yes, but it was no longer the pain of a disappointed bride. It was the pain of a woman who had been deceived, betrayed, not only by a man, but for all the promises she believed to be true. David tried to approach once more, but Claire stepped back, as if the distance between them were the only thing that still made sense. She looked at Linda, who was now silent, eyes teary, and then to John, the man who had just thrown the last stone over the broken foundation of his relationship. "I don't know what to do now," Claire murmured, more to herself than to others. I don't know if I can continue." John, seeing Claire's suffering, approached her kindly. He didn't know what he would say next, but he felt that the only way was to offer support. He knew that this was a moment of decision for her, a time when Claire needed to choose between going on with the life she had known or starting something new, something that could somehow be more true. "Claire," John said with a soft tone, "I can't erase what happened, but I can help you find a way, if you want. The choice is yours." Claire looked at him for a moment, his lost eyes in a mixture of pain and confusion. She knew she couldn't go back. The lies, the secrets, and the betrayal had cut any possibility of starting with David. But I also knew something needed to be done so that she could move on. David, watching the scene, was destroyed. He knew that the situation he had created himself had no repair. If he could go back in time, he would do everything different. But there was no time for regrets now. What he feared was to see Claire leave, and with her, all the dreams and hopes he had built in his mind. "Claire, please me. I'm sorry," he said, finally finding the strength to speak. "I know nothing I say now will change what happened, but I never wanted to hurt you that way. I love you, Claire, and I'm sorry." But his words fell into the void. Claire was no longer listening. She moved slowly, walking to the church door, where sunlight was beginning to shine softly through the windows. David's words were far away now. What else could he say when the only one left was the truth that could not be erased? "I need time, a time to think of all this. I can't stay here anymore," she said, her words loaded with a deep and almost insurmountable weight. She didn't look back. He just went out, leaving everyone behind, including David and Linda, while the pain of betrayal echoed on the walls of the church. After Claire's abrupt departure from the church, the city of Redwood Springs was in a deep silence, as if nature itself had hesitated by the emotional devastation that had just happened. Claire walked aimlessly through the streets, tears dripping freely down her face, but there was no more angry or sadness overflowing as before. It was a feeling of emptiness, as if everything she had known to have dissolved before her eyes. Marriage, the plans for the future, the happiness she believed to have, everything seemed to have been an illusion. She walked to the bank of a river that cut the city, where she used to sit with her most intimate thoughts. The sound of the water running gently brought a feeling of calm, but at the same time she felt as if the water took with her the person she was so far. I sat on the edge of the bridge, unsure what to do, and what was going on in your mind was a mixture of pain and uncertainty. The voices of David and John echoed in his head. How could she trust again? How could you move on, knowing that it had been so deeply deceived? She knew she couldn't go back in time, but the questions multiplied in her mind. Suddenly someone approached. Claire didn't need to look at who it was. The sound of breathless breath, the hesitant floor, was John. She didn't want to see anyone, especially no one in her past life. But when looking at him, something in her seemed to find a little comfort. Claire, I can't erase what happened, but I can be a support for you, he said, his soft voice, but full of a kind of respect she was missing in others throughout her life. Claire watched him for a moment, and instead of walking away, she took a deep breath and looked at the sky. I don't know who I'm more, John. I thought I knew everything about me, what I wanted. Now everything looks so empty. John sat next to her, with the same calm she always had. He knew that words could be empty at times like that, but his presence was more than enough. You'll find out, Claire. I know it's hurting now, but you have something inside you that can't be erased no matter what happened. She looked at him and, for the first time in hours, something inside her seemed to calm down. It was a seed of hope, but still very fragile. I don't know if I'm able to forgive it all, she murmured. Maybe not even for myself. Forgiveness is not about forgetting, he replied. It's about releasing the pain that imprisons us. I know it's hard, but you have more strength than you think, and you're not alone in it. Claire was silent for a long time, looking at the horizon. She didn't have the answers at that moment, but something was beginning to change. She knew that the pain she felt needed to be lived, but she also knew that the healing process would not be immediate. It was somehow willing to take the first step toward a new future. In the following days, Claire moved away from everything that connected her to the past. She made the difficult decision not to talk to David, not to seek answers from him, because she knew it would only bring more pain. Instead, she dedicated herself, to rebuild her life independently. He started working on a new personal project, something he always wanted to do but never had time because of his previous priorities. She moved away from the old memories and gradually created new bonds with friends who supported her. John was by his side all the time, but in a silent way. He offered support without pressing her, and gradually she realized that her friendship could be something more in the future. Not at that moment, but maybe one day. Over time, Claire was overcoming the open wounds, starting to rediscover. She now understood that forgiveness was not a straight line, but a journey. The pain he felt became a reminder of what she needed to be for herself: strong, authentic, and able to move on. Gradually, confidence was returning, not other people immediately, but in their own ability to deal with pain, grow with difficulties, and start over. She didn't know what the future reserved, but for the first time she was open to the idea that over time life could be something new. Months have passed since that fateful day in which Claire discovered the betrayal of David and the painful truths that came to light. Although I still felt the emotional scars of that episode, something inside it had changed. The woman who once surrendered to a dream has now been reconstructing her own story. Claire had rediscovered, and what once seemed an end now was just the beginning of a new chapter of her life. She had been more deeply involved in her work and began to help in community projects, things she always wanted to do, but had postponed. Gradually, Claire was reconnecting with the people around her, especially with John, who became a constant and comforting presence in her life. Although she still didn't know if she could move on with him, her friendship was a fundamental basis for her healing process. However, fate, as always, had other plans. One day, while Claire prepared for a work meeting, she received an unexpected call from Linda. Linda's voice was tense, almost desperate. "Claire, you need to come now. It's about David. He's in danger." Claire's heart stopped for a moment. She didn't know what to expect, but the concern in Linda's voice made her act immediately. Without thinking twice, she took the keys and drove to the house where David was. Linda said he was not well, that it seemed to have fallen into a spiral of self-destruction, and Claire knew that despite everything, she could not simply ignore the suffering of someone who had already been so important in her life. When Claire arrived, David was sitting in the room, visibly shot down. His expression was of total despair, and as he saw her, his eyes shone with a mixture of surprise and perhaps regret. "Claire," he whispered, his voice broken. I need help." The scene was so different from the image of the confident man she had known. Now he looked fragile, lost, as if the weight of guilt had finally crushed him. Linda was beside him, with a worried countenance, but at the same time, relieved to see that Claire had arrived. "I don't know what else to do. He's trying to deal with everything, but he's completely aimless." Claire looked at David for a few seconds. The words she wanted to say were there, on the tip of her tongue, but something stopped her. She knew she couldn't heal her wounds or solve her problems, but she also knew she couldn't let David succumb to pain without trying to help. Perhaps it was the last gesture of humanity she still had in her heart. "David, I don't know if you have any medicine for what you're feeling, but perhaps trying to find peace begins with you to take responsibility for everything you have done." She spoke with a quiet firmness. "You can't escape it, and no one else can do it for you." He lowered his head, his falling shoulders as if the weight of guilt were too much for him to carry alone. But Claire knew he wasn't looking for a magic solution. He needed above all to face reality, and perhaps even find a way to move on as honestly as possible. I don't know what I can do else," David said, finally lifting his eyes, seeking a thread of hope. "You need to forgive yourself," she replied, with a soft but full of sincerity. "And who knows, in the future, we can learn to deal with it together. But not now. The first step is for you to face what you have done and gradually regain confidence of yourself." Claire's speech played something inside David, and he looked at her as if he was the last person he could ask for forgiveness. His expression was mixed with pain and gratitude, something she could not describe, but made her realize that although the future was uncertain, she had done the right thing at that moment. And there, in the heavy silence of the room, Claire felt a weight being removed from her own heart. She had taken the last step to break free from everything she had lived. The chapter of her life with David was not closed, but he was on a new page, a page where she could look back without being consumed by bitterness. She still didn't know what her future would be, but she knew she would no longer be defined by the mistakes of others, but for the courage to move on. The weight of the night dragged, but the air was carried with an intense and unexpected energy. Claire did not know what was waiting for her in the next few hours, but one thing was certain: that moment would not be like any other. After the conversation with David, she felt stronger, freer, but what she couldn't predict was that the truth was still more surprised. David, with tears in his eyes, slowly got up from his chair. He looked shaken, but there was a glow of something different in him, something that seemed genuine. "I know you're right, Claire," he started to say, the hoarse voice, "but I'm not sure if I can forgive myself. How can I, after all I did?" Claire noted, without haste, as he fought with his own demons. The pain was stamped on his face, but he seemed genuinely trying to meet. Perhaps for the first time since the day his choices began to destroy everything he loved most. She knew that his words would not change his reality, but could not deny that there was a thread of hope there, a possibility of redemption. "You have to try, David. Forgiveness begins with the first step. We cannot change what we have done, but we can gradually become who we really need to be. And that, David, is in his hands, not in mine." He looked at her, and for a moment, something silent passed between them. It was no longer about anger or betrayal. There was something bigger, something almost spiritual in the simple gesture of him recognizing his flaws and seeking recovery. Claire knew that, as much as she couldn't trust him yet, she was no longer carrying the weight of hatred. She was letting him go so he could rebuild his life without further lies. But before she could take a step to get out of that tense scenario, something unexpected happened. The door of the house opened violently, and a figure appeared at the entrance. Linda, who was silent, looked at the person with a look of total unbelief. It was someone Claire hadn't seen for a long time. It was his sister, Rose. She looked different, more mature, more serious, but Rose's eyes were loaded with something else, something Claire didn't understand. She watched her in silence, trying to soothe her sister's vision, who had been away from her family for years, for reasons that Claire had never completely knew. "I knew you both were together," Rose said, her cold but controlled voice, "but I didn't know it would involve so much suffering. Claire, I need to talk to you." Claire stood, not knowing what to say. But Rose's gaze was so imposing that she knew that her sister was not just there to apologize or clarify things. There was something more in his words, something that seemed to bring out old secrets. David, realizing the growing tension in the air, took a step back as if his presence was moved. He didn't know what was happening, but he could feel that at that moment something much bigger was about to be revealed. And like Claire, he was beginning to realize that what he had done didn't just affect her. He was not the only one to carry the consequences of what had happened. Others were also involved. Rose was not there by chance. "Rose, what's going on?" Claire asked, his tone a mixture of confusion and apprehension. She didn't know if she wanted to hear the answer, but she knew she wouldn't have a choice. Destiny once again was deciding for her. Rose approached slowly with his serious look. "I left, Claire, because I didn't want to hurt you. Because when I found the truth about David, about what he did to you and our mother, I couldn't stay. He always had a secret, and that secret was what made me leave." The shock that traveled Claire's body was instantaneous. She looked at David, whose eyes were now focused as if he was falling into an even deeper spiral of regret. "Did you know, Rose?" Claire asked, almost unable to believe the words. Rose didn't answer immediately. She looked down, as if weighing her words. "Yes, I knew. And what left me even more was to see you sinking into a relationship with someone who was carrying such a big lie." What Rose revealed next made Claire's world collapse completely. "David not only cheated on you with my friend, he was involved with someone much closer to you. Someone who was manipulating the situations for him and you to get married. It was she who controlled him, Claire. She who used him like a puppet for her own interests." Claire felt the floor disappear under her feet. The final blow. The woman she trusted as a friend, and perhaps even as a sister, had manipulated everything. She looked at David, who was now in a state of emotional collapse. And it was at this moment, at the climax of all the suffering she had experienced, that the truth began to reveal herself. The greatest betrayal was not just David. It was from all the people she believed to be her allies. The pain, the disappointment, and the feeling of being the target of an overwhelming conspiracy took over her. But instead of sinking into anger and suffering, something more came into Claire. She looked at Rose, feeling a mixture of indignation and pain. But at the same time, something lighter emerged. She didn't know how, but at that moment, Claire made an important decision. "Enough," she said, her voice firm but serene. "I won't carry this burden anymore, and you both perhaps also need to learn to deal with your own consequences." Claire stayed there, in the middle of the room, the weight of all revelations still spilling over her. She knew that nothing else would be like before. The people she loved most had revealed themselves in their worst versions, and the truths that emerged were stabbed in an already torn heart. But at the same time, a sense of relief involved her. Finally, she knew the truth, no matter how much he did. She looked at Rose, who now seemed almost as broken as she. "I don't know what to do with it, Rose, but one thing is certain. I won't allow fear or lies to decide who I am." Rose was silent, but the expression on her face seemed to reflect the repentance and the pain of those who finally admitted her own flaws. There was no way to go back, neither to Claire nor for her. The manipulation and secret game was over, and now, each of us was to deal with the consequences of their choices. David, still pale and tremendously, looked at Claire with a mixture of guilt and shame. He wanted to apologize, but the words looked small at what he had done. I'm sorry, Claire. I know none of this will change what happened, but I can't escape anymore. I failed you, with you, and with everyone around me." Claire looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time in months, she was not angry or pain about him. She just felt immense sadness for everything he had lost. "But I also knew I could no longer carry that burden. Not for him, not for anyone. I feel a lot, David," she answered, her soft but firm voice. "I feel for you. But more than that, I feel for myself, for everything I allowed me to ignore. Now I'll go my way." She looked at Rose a last time, and with a slight sigh, she began to walk away. There was nothing more to say. No more. Claire was ready to move on, without looking back. Months later, Claire's life took a completely different course. She continued her work, now with a renewed purpose, investing in what really mattered to her. She dedicated herself to what made her happy, not what others expected her to be. The wounds were still there, but Claire saw them anymore as impediments. They became part of their history, and she learned to use them to grow. The relationship with John, who once looked uncertain, flourished unexpectedly, not as she imagined in the past, but as a solid and deep friendship. Together, Claire and John built a trust base, and over time, what started as a friendship turned into something else. When Claire finally had the courage to look at the past, she didn't feel angry anymore. She had found a silent peace, not in the way things ended, but in the way she decided to start over. She knew that in the end, the journey had been painful, but the only way to heal was moving on. With scars, yes, but also with renewed hope. Claire had overcome her pain. She had broke free. And that, more than anything else, was the real start. Years passed since that fateful day, and Claire was in a different place. She looked at the city that she had seen her grow, and to the reflection of her own life, which now seemed more balanced and serene. The pain of the past had not completely disappeared, but now she was part of the woman she had become, a stronger, wider, more faithful to herself. She sat on the same river where it all began, watching the quiet waters reflect the soft light of the dusk. His life had taken a surprising course full of new challenges and above all new joys. Claire smiled at herself, wondering how much she had grown. John was by his side, as always, more than a friend. He had become someone fundamental in his life. Not a substitute for what she had lost, but a person who was there to support her when she needed it most. And as she looked at the future, Claire knew that the lessons learned from the mistakes of others and with her own steps had prepared her to move on with the certainty that she now controlled her own story. If you felt touched by this story, if it has aroused feelings of overcoming, forgiveness, and the importance of rebuilding yourself, share your experience with those around you. Sometimes today's pain is the foundation for tomorrow's strength. Do not allow the mistakes of the past to define who you are. Like Claire, we all have the power to rewrite our story. Share this message of hope and inspire others to find the way to true freedom and transformation.